through music, I discovered editing, and I was an editor for 7 years at PBS in LA. And then all of a sudden, I found myself in the middle of a digital revolution in the 80s, a long time ago.
Welcome to the Lighter Darker podcast, where we talk about the creative process of filmmaking and the art of visual storytelling. Thank you for joining us. This is episode 12 of 20 that we have planned for season 1, and we release every other Tuesday. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm here with my co-host, as always, Todd.
Hey, I'm Todd Vaziri, positing supervisor and artist at ILM.
And our producer, Jenny.
Hi, Jenny Ely, production manager at ILM.
And I'm Rob Brado, Chief Creative Officer of ILM and SVP of Creative Innovation at Lucasfilm. And we all work together at ILM on visual effects and animation and immersive entertainment. And today, we are welcoming 3 supervisors to join the show. Between them, they've shaped some of the most visually stunning films of recent memory, right? The Irishman, Ready Player One, Avengers Infinity War, Ahsoka. So we're really going to get to talk with them, take us behind the curtain, right? The people who help make the impossible possible. And all 3 of them are nominated for Oscars this year for Best Visual Effects. So it's very, very fun to celebrate together with you. So first, let me welcome Nelson Sepulveda-Fauser. He joins us from Sydney. He most recently worked as visual effects supervisor on the Star Wars series Ahsoka and the Oscar-nominated Martin Scorsese film The Irishman. He's here today as ILM's visual effects supervisor, where he has been redefining terror in the Oscar-nominated film for Best Visual Effects, Alien Romulus. Welcome, Nelson.
Greetings from the future.
Yes, 5 hours ahead of us, and a day.
And a day.
Pablo Helman has brought his expertise to a lot of films, including Killers of the Flower Moon, The Fabelmans, and he has served as the production visual effects supervisor on the breathtaking and Oscar-nominated Wicked. Welcome, Pablo.
Hello.
And also nominated for his work on Wicked, we welcome animation supervisor David Shirk. Previously, David supervised the Star Wars series Obi-Wan Kenobi, award-winning films such as Mank and Ready Player One. So welcome, David, to the podcast.
Hello, good to be here.
So between the 3 of them, decades of time at ILM, innovation in visual effects and animation. So this is going to be really fun to dive into. Well, first a question from the mailbag, and then we're going to talk a lot about Alien, Romulus, and Wicked today on the show. So this will be really fun. Jenny, do you want to get us started with our first question?
Yes, our first question is from Matt Grant, and Matt asks, between someone who is entirely self-taught and someone with a college education that is specific to the industry, how much weight does the latter have in getting you an interview? Does formal education matter for visual effects these days in the way that it does for other industries?
This is going to be interesting because all of us started in an era that's different than today. So today's answer is a little different than it was when we were getting started. But Todd, what is your initial thought here?
Well, I mean, like one of the themes that we talk about a lot on this show is that, you know, in terms of getting into Hollywood or visual effects at all, that there's no one story. There's no one story that anybody has. There's no one path. And there may be suggested workflows, there's suggested paths for other industries, and education is definitely a part of that. Hollywood, maybe not so much. I mean, the education part of education is important, meaning like if you wanted to get a film degree or computer science degree or art degrees, things like that. I don't know. I've worked with everybody around this in this call for quite some time. I don't know where any of you went to school or like that got you the interview or something, particularly for visual effects. You know, the resume, that stuff is primary. That's at least from my perspective.
Exactly. And it's been a little while. Pablo, when you got your start, was that more through schooling or more through practical experience?
Well, I'm the perfect example of I don't know how I got here kind of a thing. Because I started a long time ago. I'm probably the oldest one over here. And I study music at UCLA. I have a degree in music composition. And I have a master's in educational technology. There was a time in my life when I used to uplink to satellites, shows and things like that. But then somehow through music, I discovered editing, and I was an editor for 7 years at PBS in LA. And then all of a sudden, I found myself in the middle of a digital revolution in the 80s, a long time ago. And my hair was brown. And to your question, yes, I did go to school, but I did go to school to learn about myself, about how I learn. Because and this is something that I tell my son all the time, that if you learn, how you learn, then you can learn anything in the world. So yes, then on top of that, I had experiences through the last 30 years on filmmaking. And yes, I think your resume is important and your reel is very important. But I think the most important thing is that you can work with other people. Because you can learn all the technical stuff, but all this stuff about, working with people is just inside.
Yeah. Hey, Nelson, how about you? Did you start with a formal education in visual effects or something related?
I did not. It's funny because in those times we became we got into this sort of by accident, right? It's like, I started as a biology major in school, and at some point I got interested in computers because I always had been, and I took a job and it led into art direction. And then I was at a party and somebody said, "Hey, Cineside's looking for people to do film." And on a whim I went, "All right." And the next thing I know is I jumped into Cineside in its early days, and they were doing, I think, the restoration of Snow White at the time, and I jumped into the water world without knowing a single thing about it, right? But we learned on the job. They handed you a Linux machine. They said go, and then they had me stuff to do, and I did it, and I learned it very quickly. And the next thing led to compositing, which was really something that I kind of fell in love with because you're putting the final image together for the screen. But, from there, there were no tools. There was, none of this stuff was developed, right? So any problem that came up, somebody threw the problem at you and you went, let's figure out how to do it. And we did, we built tools out of nothing. That's why, ultimately getting to ILM and kind of seeing where people had gotten from that, early 90s to when I landed at ILM, and seeing all the development of, all this great stuff and the history of all the beginning of film was super interesting to me. But like Pablo said, ultimately, I think schooling it learns you how to deal with people and how to deal with problem solving. For visual effects is just be a problem solver, however you've done it, right? And then really be interested in your craft. Jump in there and really dig into what you want to do.
It's interesting. Both you and Pablo have various artistic backgrounds. Pablo in music, you in art direction, which was a fantastic. Of course, you also had to have technical skills as well. But that was fantastic.
Well, we're both from Argentina, by the way.
Oh, there you go.
That's right.
There you go.
Nelson, yeah, we're from Argentina.
David, are you also from Argentina? Is that how you got your start?
Not recently, no, not at all. I went to a really traditional art and design school. I went to Pratt Institute in New York, and I studied film. And it's really interesting because in the mid 80s, I was sort of fascinated by computers and the idea of creating things on computers, especially moving stuff. And there really wasn't much going on at that point. There's a lot happening in the industry, but if you wanted to do it yourself, it was very much a self-starting kind of thing. And the interesting thing is, while I was studying film, because that's what I was majoring in and thought I was going to be an editor, I was spending all of my work study time working in the computer lab. The school was sitting on a bunch of computers and they had no undergraduate program yet. So they were just kind of sitting there. And I pulled the manuals off the shelf and sat there and figured out how to do this stuff. And it was that sort of offline fascination that got me kind of obliquely into the industry I wound up landing in. So school was really important, but mostly in terms of opening the avenues. But at the end of the day, what I took away from it was figuring out how to do stuff without somebody guiding me. And that served really well going forward.
And your best advice, Matt, is probably for today, is probably from people who are 3 or 5 years ahead of you, who have more recently got into the industry. Certainly you're hearing from everyone on this podcast that the reel and the work is a calling card and is going to be the thing that is looked at first, and your education may be a secondary interest, but you got to learn how to build that reel. You got to build that reel somehow. You got to get the artistic background and the technical background to be able to do the work. And those things are going to be achieved through a lot of different means. But, you just heard 3 stories with art backgrounds in school and then finding their way into what was then a very small industry, a very nascent industry. There was a couple of places in the world to go to school for it. But most people, I didn't know anywhere you could go to school for computer graphics. I didn't realize that was an option. I knew that's what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how to learn it other than try to get my foot in the door and get started doing it.
I can put in our show notes a link to our Get in the Door website. It has a lot of people who are more recent graduates or a little newer in the industry who can share their stories of how they got in, and some of them went the traditional route, a lot of them didn't. So I will link that in the show notes if you want to check out some more recent stories there.
Fantastic. Well, that takes us to our main topics for the day. We're going to dive into Alien Romulus and Wicked and just talk about some of the craft, some of the details that went into these Oscar-nominated films. Todd, did you want to start off with a question for Nelson as we dive into Alien?
Long history of the xenomorph being depicted on screen, and obviously the origin of the series is in a purely practical sense. So for Alien Romulus, ILM handled a lot of the CG xenomorphs. Clearly the emphasis, at least on this film, from the director from top down, was that the man in suit, the practical alien creature, when you're building and particularly rigging the xenomorphs for a movie like this, where that is the goal, like what specific things do you have to look out for and make sure that will really work with the computer graphics version?
Good question. Fede was really clear from the very beginning, right? He wanted to have something that was faithful to the original first 2 movies, but everything had to be grounded in reality. Right. He was really, really specific. Like, I don't want people to, like, all of a sudden, like you're saying, jump to the CG. Right. He wanted to fool the audience. He said, like, he told the story of, Stanley Kubrick fooling people with, 2001 Space Odyssey. He wanted to achieve the same thing, which for me was really appealing. Right. Mm-hmm. It's a lot harder than it looks, right? Because we can do CG really, really well. Right. But once you have something in camera, right, and you got this guy moving around doing very specific, somewhat human movements, somewhat not human movements. And now you got to replicate that in all the scenes where you can't do it with the person in the set, right? Zero gravity, action sequences, etc. So one of the mandates for the action stuff was they need to move in a way that is still believable to that guy on the set, right? But they don't move in a way that you detect them to be CG. So, we did a lot of experimentation with animation and different types of cycles and, different types of walks. And then we had to share that with Weta, and Weta had to kind of do, their versions that matched into ours, right? And so it was a bit of a complicated task to do all of that. And then on the close-ups, most people don't notice, but like you go from an extreme close-up of the guy in the suit, right? Or an animatronic, to full CG, like back to back. So we're cutting back and forth, and you can't tell. So we had to be really, really careful, Todd, to make it work. Yes.
When I saw some of the behind the scenes work, and I was absolutely fooled that certain shots that I thought were animatronic or man in suit were actually your CG stuff. And like a head turning around the corner, and you only see the top of the head. I'm like, oh yeah. And that is at least from an animation standpoint, like a good example of the restraint that was from the top down, again, from director all the way down to animator, of we don't want anybody to clearly, we don't want to telegraph what technique is being used. I was thinking back to the Mighty Joe Young remake from 1990 something or other, where the character was mostly going to be brought to life with a Rick Baker man in suit. But then there would also be CG versions. And when DreamQuest and ILM was building the CG versions, they realized we can't build a gorilla. We have to build a man in a suit. And we cannot just all of a sudden have this character jumping around and doing all these things, because that's going to immediately telegraph to the audience, oh, now they switched techniques. Kudos to the team on Romulus. Like, nobody could tell which was which, and nobody's even thinking about which is which is a huge success.
Thank you.
When you took the same techniques, I think, that blend between the two worlds for the facehuggers too. where they play in both versions, both underwater, above the water, chasing people down the hallways. It would be interesting to hear just a little bit more. I specifically pay attention to the animation because to me, the look dev and the lighting is so seamless, you can't even notice it. But especially in the animation, there had to be a lot of individual choices to keep those things creepy and fast and frenetic, but also blend with the things that were happening on set that actually you were on set for doing all those shoots.
Yeah, the facehuggers were really interesting because Weta did a great job replicating the originals and creating puppets that look very real on set, and we had them peppered through the set. But when you see the original running guy, with the clacking legs running across the floor, kind of like they did in the original movie, that's sort of the way an animatronic facehugger works, right? Is that you don't really get the full sense of any kind of weight or anything like that. So when we saw that, we kind of went, oh man. Now we got to make a chase. We can't do it with these guys. So Fede was like, okay, we got to make these guys believable. And again, that one took, a lot of animation cycles to get that right, because it's very, very easy to make something look, too lightweight or too heavy or too slow or too fast, right? It's like, it's just this really delicate balance of hitting it just right so that, the chase is something that you fully believe, right? And, but I'm really proud of that sequence because it plays really nicely. It plays really really clean. You watch that chase and you go, oh, that's pretty terrifying. Those things are really there.
It's very terrifying. And the shots against the glass, a few of those are practical. A few of those are digital. And I honestly, I saw the digital shots coming together, and I still can't remember which is which when I watch the movie back now.
Some hitting the glass are digital. There's one close up where Kaylee walks up to when she's looking through the door, and it smacks on. That's practical with a little help,
just a little help here. Well, and that's one of the things that Fede Alvarez, the director, was trying to lean into, right? Which is anytime he had an actor in a shot, he wanted a practical thing for the actor to react to get as much visceral reaction as possible.
That's right, and not just for the actor to react, but for us to have something to ground in reality, right? So every single thing that we shot and every single thing that we replicated, Fede wanted to have something on set that we said this is what it looks like in a real place, right?
Yeah.
And it's great because you have that that full reference, but it's also difficult because things on set don't do exactly the same thing that they do in space, for example, right? Or in zero gravity. So then you kind of go, all right, now we got to solve all these other problems to make it all really tied together. Right. The other aspect of it was the photography. Galo Olivares is excellent person. Him and Fede had this really, really clear vision of what they wanted to do with the photography, and everything that we did was geared toward matching that photography faithfully, right? So from replicating the lights exactly, every single light temperature, from replicating the lenses exactly, and he was very, very specific about the lenses. He wanted lenses that were very, very clean. I actually have a really nice quote from Gallo about why he picked those lenses. He said something along the lines of that if you had aberrations that he says I felt that any artifacts would distract from what we wanted to show, right? So one of the things that was very, very specific was to not have lens flares and lens aberrations and that sort of thing, to try to keep as clean an image as possible. So the goal was always to match photography. But then when you go into space, you don't have the same light sources as set. So what do you do, right? So then we had to solve some of those problems. Yeah.
The lighting on the exteriors is so beautiful, and it feels like it's a beautiful hybrid between NASA photography that's very real and high contrast, and with just a touch of that cinematic style, so you can see everything and you understand what the story is going on, but it's more dramatic than a lot of other space shots we've seen in a lot of movies.
Yes, the NASA photography was something that we set off to do very specifically. It's like, light it as if you are in space. It needs to be believable that you're in space. And then you do it and you look at it and you go, man, this is really hard because you still need light sources, right? So it became a conversation with Gallo. He was really instrumental because Gallo kind of came in, took a look at what we were doing, and he goes, oh, but on set you do this, right? And then so we treated it like you were lighting a miniature on a set so that it would kind of match to the originals. but still within the language of what, NASA photography was. So that again was a really like very restrained exercise in lighting, and had to be very, very balanced. And then there was something that one of the compositors pulled out that was really funny. Is the Ridley Scott, when he was shooting Alien. There's a quote from him in one of the documentaries where he said, I think it was like his production designer said, "But there's no smoke in space," and Ridley Scott says, "There is now, mate." Right? So we realized it's like if you don't put a little bit of something out there, right, it's very difficult to make it look cinematic. So the way that we got around that is when the Echo Probe comes through in the very beginning, going through all the debris, we had it very, very clean as you would see it in space, and it looked very CG. So then we added, very fine particulate, as if there was this just very finely molded stuff to make it look like Atmos, and that kind of took over the edge. And Fede looked at that and went, "Yeah, that's it. That's what I want."
I can't tell you. Probably all of us here have looked at a lot of NASA photography, just shaking our heads, going, "Oh my gosh, we can't do this." Not that we can't do this, but it's not cinematic. It's not going to work for our movie because ultimately it's a movie. There was one little bit of space of a space shot that I wanted to call out that I thought was a really nice touch. It was a shot of one of the engines firing up very close to camera and then moving away from camera, and a few what looked like droplets of water hitting the lens.
Yes.
And as an Alien fan, of course, that drew me right back to the first Alien movie where Ripley turns on the engines to try to kill the alien. And it's an extended shot where you're looking right up into the engines of that lifeboat. And it is like water. It's engine material going right through the lens, and it's dabbling all over the camera. And to me, that was like, oh yeah, this is an Alien movie. How great is that? Nice little touch, not overdone. Very well done.
Yeah, that was a great shot. We call it the homage shot because there's a shot in Aliens where you see sort of the exact same thing. It's when the alien gets ejected from the ship. So we studied that really closely. Connie actually did the shot.
You're kidding. That's great.
She did, and studied it really, really closely. And we believe what they did, I'm not entirely sure, but is that they put an actual misting and water stuff hanging from the ceiling coming toward camera, right? To make it look like it was ejecting.
Yep.
So we replicated that, but with the motion of the ship, it was really tricky. It was really hard. It didn't look right. It just always looked CG, right? So it was a super balance of how do we get exactly those droplets looking the same as what that homage shot is, right? But with all the true motion to the ship. And I think it turned out pretty spectacular.
It's a beautiful shot. And for those who don't know Nelson and Connie, they're partners. Both were at ILM in San Francisco for many years, and then moved down when we started our Sydney studio, and both lived down there with their family there. So that's really fun that you guys are both on that same show.
And I worked with Connie when she came from Germany to work on Independence Day.
Yes. That's when I first met Connie, too.
Yes, 30 years ago.
30 years ago, Pablo.
That's right.
So this is a perfect transition because we will come back and ask at least one more question specifically of Nelson, but let's turn this into a full group conversation. Yeah. Both shows really balance nostalgia and innovation, right? Making a movie for a modern audience. Romulus, is a 45-year-old franchise. Wicked is a 30-year-old musical, but they both feel very modern and appropriate for today's audience. So whether we're talking about how you bring a xenomorph to life, respecting the past but modernizing it for the future, or figuring out like what does Oz's Emerald City look like while we're pushing technical boundaries, what are some of the things that you all keep in mind as you're hearing from the directors, you're hearing from the production designers, you're getting started on these films? What is your point of view? Maybe, Pablo, I'll throw to you to get started. What are some of the things that are top of mind as you're getting started on a movie like this?
Scale. We needed to explain the world, the universe in which we lived, and it had very specific styles that were started by the production designer. And there was there were rooms and rooms full of all kinds of references, and we started in London prepping the work about, I'd say, 20 weeks out before we started shooting And we saw those rooms being filled little by little, and we were all the departments. It was very collaborative. We were all part of discovering this world, and we were learning from John Chu as he was looking at these pictures, what he liked, what he didn't like. There was a conversation, obviously, about architecture and what these buildings were going to be used for, and who was going to be, who were the inhabitants of these rooms, and why did they have to be so big? Right. And then you go back to the original story of the wizard. He's a big character. And so he needs things to be really, really big, even if there is nobody in the palace.
Right.
So we picked that up, and then after that, then you go into materials. What Emerald City? Well, it's made of emeralds. Well, it can't really be made of emeralds. And then is there a glass there? Is there a material that we don't really know? I mean, it could be a material that is not part of this world. So yeah, it's a combination of all kinds of things, and everybody in the film little community that we are as a project learns from those experiences. And then the other thing that came from production design plus all the art directors is making models. Because this director is very tactile. Very organic. As a company, we all take a look at the models as they're built, and then we kind of figure out how we're going to do this. Especially lighting, what is wild, what is not, how much. It was 25 feet, high interiors and 55 feet exteriors. So, where do we take over?
So much has been said about how much is built practically on this show. And you're talking about 25 feet interiors, that's a lot. 55 feet exteriors, that's a lot. That said, these buildings are so enormous that still only takes care of, a quarter of the shots that are in camera? There's a lot of extension there, too.
Yeah. Plus, I think one of the other things that we haven't talked about is the music part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we, like I always say, this is my first musical experience as a musical. And for me...
outside of your schooling and all the the touring you did before you were a visual effects supervisor.
Yes. I actually wanted to write music for films. When I first started, that's what I went to school for. But then somehow my career ended up being music on one side and images on the other. And for me, it was the images, start and end with the work that we do. Mm-hmm. And then we were in the middle of it, and the dancers, for instance, So I remember the conversation in which, we just walked through a set that was like one football field big, right? And so, American football, that is. So the dancers started rehearsing, and they couldn't dance because the floors were, they were all kinds of stones. Mm-hmm. So they had to change the floors. And so now, with that conversation about, everything is practical, the floor to ceiling. Well, guess what? We changed a bunch of floors in there after the dances.
This is to put the dance floors in, and then you had to paint those out?
Once the dancers couldn't dance, they changed the floors.
Mm-hmm. Right.
To be flat. And so now we shot the movie, and now we're, Jesus, that floor doesn't look good. Let's just change it. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, there you go. The whole sequence gets all the floors changed. And then to the question, floor to top, all practical. Well, you have to put the light somewhere. And so when you look up, the ceilings were completely replaced. It's part of what we do, yeah? It's a story. We complete the story. And it was a lot of fun. I think the music part of it is what got me to the project. Just being in the center of, all these dancers and stuff, or taking a look at the performance, and then all of a sudden there is music that comes into the set. It's like you're watching a movie. It was a great experience.
Yeah, getting to be on set for some of those performances had to be quite an experience, that's for sure.
I remember some early conversations Pablo and I had I read the script back when we were working together on Obi-Wan Kenobi, and we were talking about the movie, and Pablo didn't have any familiarity with it. I did already. I knew the musical fairly well, and I was kind of intrigued to work on something that was a musical. A lot of times when you're looking at shots, reviewing animation, you just mute the audio out. You don't want it to get in the way. You want to have a pure vision of it. And I've never been like that. Whenever a scene gets temp tracked in the edit, I'm always watching it with the music, because for me, it's like a window into what the filmmaker's thinking about the context of the scene emotionally, because the thing that hooks me and the projects I like to work on are things that have some emotional weight to them. And that was kind of what was cool about the idea of working on something like Wicked. There's all this emotional freight in all these scenes. And the thing that's kind of cool about a musical is that communication has such purity to it. So it's great. It's like the groundwork is already there. You know where the scene is going. And I just like to kind of absorb that, feel what it's supposed to be, and it kind of instructs you where you're supposed to go with things.
I think one of the things about music that nobody realizes, well, maybe some people do, but there's the psychology of it. And there is certain, intervals, augmented fourths and specific, harmony that you as a human want to resolve.
Yeah.
There's tension. There's all kinds of things that go with it, and you don't know it, but you react to it. That is, if you don't resolve that seventh, chord, there's something that doesn't sit well with you, and it's the same thing with images, but a lot more. It's a lot more sensitive, I think, with smells and sound.
I remember you and I were in that very first meeting, I think, that you had with John Chu. And it was kind of an interview. It was before John had picked his head of department, visual effects supervisor, to run the whole show. And I remember you went into that meeting very, very well prepared, which, of course, you always want to be well prepared if you're going to go sit down and talk to a director about their movie. But you also came with a very specific point of view. You said what you had imagined would be the only way to do the creatures, only way to pull off the balance of the realism and the expressivity of the characters, and you had all this artwork that you walked in with. And I remember sitting back watching this meeting going like, wow, if John doesn't like this, there's no way we're getting this job. But the specificity of it and the research you had done was, I could just, first I was trying to read him. I'm like, does he like this or does he hate it? And then like, as soon as you finished talking, he's like, yes. And then he started just building on everything you were pitching, which was, like, I remember being like kind of a gutsy move, but then also when you and I chatted afterwards, you're like, well, this was the movie. If I was the right supervisor for this movie, we were going to be on the same page. Otherwise, I couldn't see it another way. So it was such a good, it had a lot of specificity. I think a lot driven from the music and the.
Yeah, it was. But everybody likes the fact that basically the message was, we are here to shoot the movie the way you want and who the director likes to direct. So let's put somebody on the set to, for you to direct. And, it's very rare that, somebody doesn't like that.
Right. Because in every case, you had an actor on set acting for all those digital roles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's a difficult thing to land a job. But like I said before, I cheated a little bit because I do a lot of research. So for a week, I took a look at his, what he had done before, interviews of the DPs, and how he covers a scene. You talk about storytelling, you talk about beginning, middle, and end, and resolution, and a little bit of lighting, but you do it out of research, out of understanding. Try to understand if I'm going to spend 3 years with this person, I better have a pretty good idea of what this person wants, or else my life is going to be miserable. So, that's part of getting a job.
I wanted to touch on something, David, you mentioned about the musical numbers and being, and particularly those numbers being the foundation of the edit. Typically when we all work on space battle shots, sequences, fight sequences, action car chases, and things like that, we're constantly pitching to the director, if we get this shot a little bit longer, we can really sell this moment of this, and then, oh yeah, don't worry, yeah, let's lengthen that shot, or let's shorten this shot. And there's no concern of like, oh my gosh, the foundational integrity of the sequence will be out of balance. Whereas on a show like this, there is no one frame added without taking a frame away from the next shot, or because those beats have to happen at just the right moment. How did that work with an animation, or did you just immediately dive in and go, all right, this is where we have to hit these marks at this time?
It was really straightforward in the kind of down on the ground personal acting stuff, like the birth scene with Dulce Bear. She was singing. It was fairly straightforward, and you pretty much, when you have a character that's planted there and singing, you can have all kinds of openings to shift how the action's played, but you don't have to really worry about things like cuts. You mentioned space battles specifically. We had Defying Gravity, and really it's the same problem. You've got somebody flying around and zooming through space, and you're like, we really need 20 more frames here to finish this action off so that it feels like it's a good place to cut. What was great about that is having the foundation of Cynthia's performance, and which of course was built on stage, and collaborating with physical effects and the stunt teams, all this great work on the wires, and her performance was right there. It was terrific. John wanted more scope, so we were always looking for ways. Well, how can we open this up? Can we take this bit where she's swinging off a pendulum and make that a wider path? And how do we do that without compromising what she had done? So it was that constant game. And there were points along the way where we would pitch ideas. Well, how if we try this? I think we can do a thing where she sweeps past camera, and we can, we're on her back and the cape goes past camera, it'll kind of wipe, and then we can reveal her flipping around and sliding away from camera. How cool would that be? And it's like, okay. And then for a couple of weeks, there'd be a big hole in the cut. And like, this is where David's going to give us this moment of sliding around. And
yeah, I think it has a lot to do with John Chu's, his process. Yes, there was previs, but it was superseded by a little stick with alphabet at the end, and moving that stick through the model, and all of us paying attention, and then actually having shot something, and then having put it together, and combining shots and doing a combination of things. And the good thing is that he's completely open. He's very kind of experimental and loves improvisation. John has a very open-handed kind of creative process, which is fantastic for all of us. There's great opportunity to collaborate, and he's really generous. So there was a lot of that. But as you say, sometimes the music can be a little tyrannical in terms of we got to be back here at this point. You can't have more than 3 frames, and so there would definitely be cases where we had to do a little bit of patching across the cut just to make it, just keep that kind of flow. And John was great in those moments. We're like, well, she's flying out of frame here, but then we're going back, and she's backing up and going across the frame again, and it's all those things. And it was just going with him, and he's like, no, this is going to work, and you do it, and it works, and that was great.
Speaking of timing and complicated shots, the opening shot of the film, that oneer, I don't even know how long it is, but I mean, it does so much heavy lifting for the storytelling. It establishes, everything about the legacy story. It gets you set up for the story you're about ready to hear. There was a lot of timing that went into that shot too.
There was.
Yeah, there was. I think it's something that it took all of us that were around John to understand what is it that he was meaning to do with that shot. Especially because it was such a long shot that eats up a lot of resources and time, and it was first shot turnover, last shot final. But in his mind, it was the crime scene. It's basically there has been a crime that is going to happen throughout the 2 movies, and if at the end of the second movie, you're going to come back to the beginning of the first one and realize why things are the way they are. And he was very particular. But I mean, I think plus we did like 3 or 4 months of previs. We gave it away because we started shooting. Then we did all kinds of post-vis. Then we put it, we went to a toy store and we bought a castle and a bunch of different things because that was the only way that John can put it on the table. Just here's your iPhone and then just move it. And then, it took 2 weeks for him to do it. And finally, David came in and sat with him. And you sit over here, you don't get up until we get in the shot.
All right, I'm going to open Maya and we're going to look at this.
And John appreciated that because he could change everything right there,
Yes.
So, and then there was the producing the actual shot,
With all that level of detail, beautiful
and
waterfalls.
talk about music and trying to hit beats, because it was this continuous shot, and there were really specific beats that had to be hit with the action. And there'd be sections of the shot, I remember as we come out of the castle, we kind of sweep across that desert out beyond Oz. And, I remember an earlier point where it was like, well, it's a little dull. We're looking at this desert for so long. So let's get around back to the castle. So now you've chopped a lot of seconds out of the shot, but we have to drag the camera now because now we have to still wait for this beat to hit on the music. And so there's this constant retiming, and oh, by the way, that waterfall isn't big enough. Let's push it back from camera, make it like a mile tall. And so we're constantly changing both the space and the camera and the events inside, and I would say to Pablo on the phone sometimes, well, we got the camera worked out, but I have to redo all the monkeys again because, of course, that's all.
This is the thing about visual effects. Yeah, I mean, you can get a sequence to be whatever the director wants it and the editor wants it to be, and then we start rendering the shot, and all of a sudden, all the simulation looks like it's like you can barely see the smoke going by or water. Why is that? Well, your creature is traveling at 700 miles an hour.
Right.
And why is
Time
that?
to fix that.
Because you have an edit.
The first version I did, I was paying attention to how fast the monkeys were. Like, this is all legitimate. These monkeys are going at legitimate speed. And we're like, well, that's not going to work at all.
It's they have to fly almost the speed of sound.
Yeah,
There's a couple of places. It's like, well, the waterfall keeps getting bigger and it keeps moving further from camera. We got to really haul it to get across this stuff.
Yeah, and there's a lot of cheating there. But at the end of the day, it's about what you see.
Right.
It's does it tell the story that you wanted to look to tell? And to be honest, the director doesn't care.
Yeah, 700 miles an hour, 50
what?
miles an hour.
Fix
Doesn't
it.
matter. Yeah, just make it look right. That's right. Todd, before we move on, did you have one or two more questions you wanted to get in?
When you all have to work together to try to find the best shot, I mean, what are some tricks of working together and that give and take, the push and pull between sticking to your schedule, sticking to your storyboards and your shots, and wait, we just had a really good idea, or the performer had a really good idea, but it's going to change the framing of the shot. How do you balance those things on a production this big?
Yeah, I think from being on set, I mean, that's where John loves to be. Mm-hmm. He plays. He does his playing time, and who am I to tell him not to do that?
Yeah.
I mean, you try to be as informative as possible without being curtailing and clinical. But you are part of the process, and you react to things. And if there is time, there's other people that do that. There's the AD, there is the line producer, there is the creative producer, and they are all in concert. So you just go for the ride, and the only thing that you don't know is what's going to end up in the in the edit. Yeah. It happened to me lots of times that we were shooting something, and I was saying to John, this is never going to work. But sure, let's just go for it. Well, guess what? Ended up in the edit. There's some huge cables that are going right in somebody's face. It's like, you can't use that. Well, it's in the movie.
It might be in the movie, and you'll be fixing it.
It's interesting because even sometimes going into post, there were still openings for injecting that kind of stuff. A lot of times we had great footage of the on-set performers standing in for Sage History and gave a really kind of interesting, thoughtful performance that we could lean into. And then sometimes they'd cut to some random placeholder, and John never wanted it to be about Chistery's watching Elphaba read the Grimoire, or Chistery's looking at Elphaba, or Chistery's looking in this direction. There was always, for him, what's he doing? What's he thinking? What are we trying to say in the shot? So we found ourselves in the position to, we had to shoot animators acting these things out so that John could look at performance options and think about what he wanted us to use. So we had these interesting cases where we'd be in animation dailies and I was literally critiquing people's performances. It's like, well, let's do a little more of this, a little more of that. And then we'd put a package together, send it to John, and he'd cut with it. And it led to a kind of interesting thing. There was a shot that he wound up choosing one of my performances. And so there was me acting on screen in place of Chistery, and then eventually he got replaced. So when we had the final performance done, I remember one day in dailies it comes up and there's Chistery acting and John just starts giggling. He's like, I'm sorry. He's like, all I can see is you. And that kind of became a hallmark for the entire rest of the show. Right up through our final review, he would just kind of start laughing every time it came up because he said, it just still looks like you. So, but it was kind of an interesting opening for us to collaborate with him and figure out what those creature performances were going to be.
Those performances are so strong. And they really come through. I know he's also having fun because he had seen you in the reels. And I think in the 3-minute before and after reel, I think we get a glimpse of you performing as, I think it's Chistery.
That's the shot.
That's the shot? Okay, great. Take a look. We'll link to
great.
these reels online if you grab it out of the show notes. With time getting short, I thought maybe we'll steal Todd's last question and just ask it of each of you.
Yeah.
What's one shot that surprised you the most as you were doing this production? Maybe it was because it took the most iterations because it was really tricky to find the right answer, or maybe it was because it came together and really told the story visually in a way that excited you. What's just a shot that still captures your imagination, or a shot that has a story to tell, but 1 minute each? This is going to be the lightning round. And Pablo looks least intimidated, so I'll throw to Pablo first.
I think that the most surprising shot for me was the shot, almost the last shot of the movie. It's not the last, but the next to the last, which is the cape. Because in the play at the end of the Act 1, you see you get surprised as an audience seeing that the cape is moving, and there was this idea that we all kind of like been thinking about. How are we going to do that shot? Is this going to be, we're going to cut to that shot and the cape is going to be 60 feet long? Is it going to be laughable or not? But so it kind of like, and for a while, I would just go to bed thinking this is never going to work. And this going to be one of those shots that will never work. And we all contributed to it. Myron, Alice, David, all the animators, everybody really contributed to it. And it was also done in Sydney. And Anthony Smith was the supervisor over there. And so it worked, but it worked not because of the cape, but because of also it's a moment in the movie where we almost go to a religionist kind of a environment where the clouds are Renaissance and the light is it's in the back lighting all these clouds. We get into these incredible colors, greens and oranges and she's basically alphabet's basically backlit. But then the cherry on the whole thing is that it's a structural thing for the movie. If you really look at that, she goes back, there is the cape, and then the music grows, and she does the work right, and then the music basically gives you the tonic. Talking about music, just the tonic for the whole music cue. And then she turns around, and then you're such a high in the audience, and then she turns around, and then you go, wait, where are you going?
Yes.
She turns around, and then you lose her, and then to be continued.
Yes.
It's everything works for that shot, and there's just very collaborative thing.
Wow, that's a beautiful shot. Nelson.
For me, it was the planet. Because we have very limited reference of what it's like to exit a planet and see it from above. We have just Earth, right? So our starting point was Earth, and we've made it sort of a very faithful, realistic looking planet with full atmosphere, et cetera, and started showing that. But we needed to discover a planet that felt the same way, felt realistic, felt like you were in space, and like it was a real piece of photography that matched Gallo's aesthetic and also kind of gave you the full fantasy. And as soon as you go into fantasy, you can do anything, right? So that's where we went. I didn't realize just how difficult it is to pull off a planet that because we've seen them a million times, right? Mm-hmm. But they usually feel like, a CG planet or a Digimat. It couldn't feel that way. So we went through quite a bit of iteration there because it was a real kind of pivotal moment transitioning us from photography, right? And from the field that they had established. And now we were out in space and making that coherent so that you didn't jump out all of a sudden into CG world, right? So it took quite a bit of discovery there, and ultimately, doing the physicality of the planet, doing a true atmosphere, and then doing volumetric clouds that actually moved, and making everything physically correct, I think was the real payoff there.
Nice. David.
Mine's not quite as profound as Pablo's is, because I think his idea was a beautiful one. But when we were in the early stages of development, Glinda and Elphaba are walking through the Hall of Grandiosity, and on set they shot with one stand-in under each window, and we laid it all out. Here's one monkey under each window, and the discussion came up, wouldn't it be cool if there were more monkeys in here? Maybe it should be an overwhelming amount of monkeys. And we're like, oh well, here's 20 monkeys, here's 40 monkeys, here's 60, and eventually it's all the monkeys, and we're like, okay, that's cool. But then it's like, we have this transformation shot where we have to have all these monkeys changing into winged creatures, and that turned out to be huge. But in the opening night of the movie, we're attending the premiere. I'm sitting next to Anthony Smith, who headed our Sydney team, and they did that set of shots. And I'm sitting next to Marissa, and the shot comes up where Marble turns around and all the monkeys take off behind her in slow motion. The crowd spontaneously applauded. I almost jumped out of my seat. I remember I was like, I got so excited at the reaction to that, and that was a really rewarding moment.
No, 3 fantastic shots. Thank you so much for sharing those stories. Well, this has been super fun. This takes us to the Martini, where we each get to share one fun thing that we have enjoyed that others might. Todd, why don't you get us kicked off with the Martini?
Yeah, sure. A short time ago, we lost one of our great American filmmakers, David Lynch, and one of the most influential filmmakers in the history of cinema. And there's so much if you want to dive in. If you have never seen any of David Lynch's movies, known for their surreal, very weird qualities. And I'm going to recommend probably his least surreal and least weird movie. It's on Disney Plus. It's a G-rated movie called The Straight Story. It is just an absolutely beautiful picture about human beings going through stuff. And it culminates with 2 brothers having a relationship. The relationship is implied the entire film, and then you see the 2 of them together. And it is just bravura filmmaking. It is just such a wonderful movie. And it's readily available to anybody who has Disney Plus. So I strongly recommend A Straight Story.
Nice. Thank you, Todd. Jenny.
Yes. So my Martini this week is all of the DC universe. So I've been a DC loyalist my whole life. My gateway drug was Batman 1989. And of course, like most girls of the 80s, Wonder Woman. But over the last decade or so, I feel like Marvel has been hogging the spotlight a little bit. So, and there's great Marvel movies and streaming series, but these are not the characters that I have a lot of nostalgia for or even really knew a lot about until seeing the films in the MCU. So I feel like DC has kind of been waiting in the wings for its big moment, and I think it's here. So James Gunn is heading up DC Studios now, and from what I've seen so far, I am pleased and hopeful. The trailer for the new Superman movie I watched many, many times. And of course, Crypto, Superdog, stole the show. But the whole thing just made me giddy and excited for the future of the DCU. And I am very picky about my Lois Lanes. And so far, I approve of this one. We'll see how she turns out in the film. But so far, so good. And also a lot of the new animated shows that are coming out. So on Max, Creature Commandos is incredible. If you haven't watched that, I recommend it. It's funny. It's extremely violent. It is a very hard R. If you're thinking about watching it with kids or your grandma, just be cautious. It's pretty racy. I don't want to spoil anything, but I'll just say it's kind of Suicide Squad adjacent. And David Harbour voices Frankenstein. If you need more to convince you than that, then you're not going to watch it anyway. So, and Alan Tudyk is a great voice actor. He voices a very unhinged character. Season 1 is out now on Max. The whole thing is there. I'd say definitely check that out. And also the comic books are killing it. So last October, they kicked off a new line called the All In series or All In line. And it's basically a new entry point for anybody to start reading DC Comics. So, because, it can be hard to jump into the storyline of a comic book and have absolutely no clue what's going on because everything is interconnected and, certain arcs go for a short amount of time, a long amount of time. So it's all of our favorite standard superheroes: Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, The Flash, plus a lot of newer characters and groups that are getting their own storylines. And you can pick up and dive in anywhere with any of those characters and not feel like you're left behind because you're gonna be in from the beginning. So there's also a parallel series called the Absolute series, and it's very, very cool. It's one of the best comic book lines I think I've read in a long time. It's a little bit of an alternate universe for some of the big name characters. So there's the premise is like, what if Batman, or what if Bruce Wayne didn't have money? Or what if Wonder Woman hadn't been raised by the Amazons? Like, how would they have fared as superheroes? It's very wild and dark. So there's Absolute Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman right now, and then Absolute Flash and Absolute Martian Manhunter, I think, are next, starting in March. So they're like 5 comics each. It's a short storyline, easy to get through, and there's takes on these classic characters that we've never seen before, which is really hard to do with characters that have been around since like the 30s and 40s. We've seen every version of them possible, and there's definitely some new stuff. So I'm very excited about what's happening in the land of DC right now, and I can't wait to see what's coming up.
The entire DC universe.
All of it.
Dear Martini.
The entire
Perfect.
DC universe.
That's great. No, a lot of fun stuff coming up, and I was just looking. Yeah, it's very, very fun.
Yeah.
Pablo.
You're probably wondering what Pablo does when he doesn't do visual effects. So I brought my Rickenbacker bass.
Yeah. Nice.
And this is an incredible bass, and it is incredible for lots of reasons. Yes, used to use it, but because of this, which is Paul McCartney using the same bass that I bought.
Nice.
And this is what keeps me sane.
I love it. That is a beautiful instrument. We got to hear you play it. Well, I guess we may hear you play it on the outro here. Yeah, okay.
Later on.
Hang on. 1 minute, you'll hear it on the outro. David.
Okay, so in our world, we deal with lots of ambiguity, and we do not live in a binary world in our pursuits. And I love to have a distraction that's a little more binary. And I've actually started taking to jigsaw puzzles. It's great to leave the desk, go away, put a few pieces in something. You're like, I've accomplished something, and then go back to work. So I'm going to plug something called Liberty Puzzles. So some friends of mine in New Jersey had a stack of these things, and I put a few pieces in while I was there. And they're beautifully crafted. They're made in Colorado. It's all laser cut from 1/4-inch wood, and because of that, they can make pieces that are crazy. The coolest thing about finishing one of these puzzles, I did one that was kind of folk art of a bunch of stags running through woods. So you sandwich it, flip it upside down after it's completed, pull the back off, and the pieces are basically all the elements from the front of the puzzle, but cut into the wood. So there's antlers and trees and small animals and birds and actual stags, but they're all shaped out of these puzzle pieces. They're beautiful works of craftsmanship, and they are incredibly difficult to put together, but not frustrating, which is kind of amazing. So that's
Nice.
my plug, Liberty Puzzles.
Are you able to just do it a piece at a time, or are you like me and you're like, I'm just going to work on this puzzle, and then it's 4 a.m. and you're like, what am I doing with
I'm
my
just going to
life?
get like 2 pieces in and walk away, and 15 pieces later, and you've lost half of dinner time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the mark of a good, any good puzzle, right? Difficult but not frustrating. That's a good mark.
Yeah.
Nelson.
My martini is something that I like to do around Newtown, which is where I live. Newtown in Sydney is kind of a bit of an avant-garde part of the city. There's a lot of street art, and I like to take walks, not just through Newtown, but through Sydney as well. And I photograph street art, and I photograph sort of curious things that I find on walls and sidewalks and telephone poles. Just because one, I love the walk, because the city is sort of a mixture between wilderness and city. But also, it feels like I'm kind of going through like mini private museum, and then I have some images at the end that I collect, and they remind me of really great places. I do it around, anytime I travel, but here there's just so much around here, and it's constantly changing. So it's like having a little art gallery in my own tent. So
Oh, that's
that's
great.
what I do. Yep.
Do you post that online, Nelson, or do you just kind of keep it in the archive? Yeah.
I keep it for myself, and like most of my art, it's like I just,
Private collection.
It's a bit of a private collection. Yeah.
Nice.
It's nice.
Love it. That's great. My Martini is some Lightroom presets. I also like photography, and found some film simulation presets that work in Lightroom. And I found them online somewhere. Somebody linked to them. They're called the classicpresets.com. And then on there, if you're into color science at all, they have an interesting blog post about how you should be doing your color correction in a linear color space, which is how we work here at work, so all the math works properly. It turns out if you combine these film simulations with the linear camera profiles they link to, they tell you how to make them, but you can also go to Tony Kuiper's site. I'm not saying his last name right, but something like that, which is linked to from the classicpresets.com. You can load those in as profiles into Lightroom, and then you have a linear color space to work in, and then you can use these film emulation LUTs on top of that. It's actually not LUTs, it's actually using the color corrector knobs in Lightroom to simulate these film looks. And, I don't know how accurate they are, but they feel very nostalgic. They look beautiful. If you photograph with these things in mind, I think you can get some nice compositions. And they even have details like being able to pull stops or push stops on your negative, and it has exposed the process in the same way, so you can flash your blacks or bring your highlights down using those kind of looks, which I find very satisfying and fun. And it's nice because you can just experiment with all of them. Like, what if I shot this on Agfa 400? What if I pulled a stop? Oh, that's cool. That's actually pretty nice. So it's a nice way to experiment with your photography. My photos are online, photos at myname.com, photos.robredo.com, with some stuff there if you want to take a look at some stuff that I haven't yet processed with these new looks. But I think the classic presets, if you grab like his latest set of about 100 of them with most of the film simulations he's done, I think it sets you back about 50 euros or like $53. So pretty reasonable for all the effort that has gone into it. So thank you for listening to the Lighter Darker podcast. Thank you to our guests, Pablo and David and Nelson, who joined us today. If you have a question for the show or you'd like to suggest a topic for a future show, email us at lighterdarker@ilm.com. You can also contact us or follow us on social media. We'll leave all of our links for those of us who want to be linked to in social media on ilm.com/lighterdarker, along with the transcripts for this episode. You can find all that stuff in the show notes. If you like the show, like and subscribe on YouTube, or leave us a comment there, or give us a review on Apple Podcasts. We would love for you to let your friends know about the show. We want to thank Industrial Light and Magic for hosting the Lighter Darker podcast. This show is produced by Jenny Ely and myself, Rob Brado. Today's episode has been edited by Chris Hawkinson, and we want to thank the entire PR team, led by Greg Gresby, who worked behind the scenes to make all this stuff happen. So thank you, team. And congratulations and good luck to Nelson, Pablo, and David. Will be cheering you on at the Academy Awards coming up on March 2nd. And we're going to leave you today with music from our very own Pablo Helman. So thank you for listening to the Lighter Darker podcast. Until next time, may your pixels be both lighter and darker.